On tonight, the scripture that we will give consideration to is Genesis chapter 18, verses 23 through 33. A number of years ago, Irving Berlin came to this country from Russia at the age of about 5. During his time here, he took up a career as a composer or songwriter. He is said to have written more songs, or at least more meaningful songs, than any other composer in American history. One composer, Douglas Moore, described him as the greatest songwriter that has ever lived. Another composer, Jerome Kern, says Irving Berlin has no place in American music. He is American music. If you're not familiar with the name Irving Berlin, you're certainly familiar with many of the songs that he wrote, such as There's No Business Like Show Business, Putting on the Ritz, and White Christmas, which became famous as sang by Bing Crosby. But he had another song that he wrote, which is considered to be an American classic, and that is the song God Bless America. This song was written in celebration of the end of World War I, as well as his appreciation for being an immigrant who got an opportunity to move from poverty to finding career success and fame in this country. And so this song was written as an expression of gratitude for a country that allowed him, a nobody, to become somebody. As I think about the song God Bless America, it is certainly an epithet that needs to be echoed in these times in which we live. God bless America is certainly the prayer, the need of the hour. When we say God bless America, we don't perhaps say it for the same reasons as Irving Berlin, who is simply expressing appreciation as well as celebrating the end of a war. We need to say it because America finds itself greatly divided, greatly wounded by its polarization and political turmoil, not to mention the racial and economic divide that continues to permeate throughout the fabric of this country. When we look at what is going on in this country, God bless America is only the beginning of our plea as we beg God for His grace and His mercy. We have to always remember that who's in charge is not so much who is in office as it is him who sits high and looks low. We wonder if the current president will concede and acknowledge his defeat. Will the president-elect bring about effective political change through policies and processes aimed at helping the American people? I am more concerned not with the political structure, but with the responsibility of the church and of God's people. What happens here in America, as should be the case for all of those who are believers, is that we ought to recognize the church's charge and not abdicate or give our responsibility over to the government to lead the change that God would like to see in this country. If we sing or say or pray, God bless America, our actions need to follow the words of our songs, our sayings, and our prayer. Because ultimately, who is in charge of America is not the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, not the three branches of American government. Ultimately, God is in charge of America as he is the entire universe. When we look in the Bible, for example, in Genesis chapter 18, verses 23 through 33, we see a conversation, an interesting conversation with the Lord and with Abraham. And the Lord was getting ready to rain down his wrath and his judgment against Sodom. Abraham asked the Lord if he could spare the city, given the fact that he could potentially destroy the righteous with the unrighteous. And so Abraham asked the Lord if he would spare the city if he could find 50 righteous people. The Lord agreed. And then Abraham said, well, maybe we won't find 50. What if it's 45? The Lord agreed. What if it's 40? The Lord again agreed. And the number got down to 10. God said if he could find just 10 righteous people, he would spare the city. In context, that scenario is different than our reality today. But supposing there were an Abraham today who looks at all of the turmoil and all of the problems in America and say, Lord, would you spare this country if you could find 50, 45, 40, if you can find 10 righteous people? Can God find those people? Here's what we need to do. This is not what Donald Trump needs to do or the Republican Party. This is not what Democrats need to do. This is not legislated by Congress, approved or vetoed by the president, or judged by the Supreme Court. Number one, each of us who claim to be believers need to examine ourselves. When we stand before the great I Am, he will not ask us what did the president or president-elect do, or what political affiliation did we have. Each of us must give an account for ourselves, the things that we have done, whether they be good or bad. Second, each of us need to be God's spokespersons. We so often talk politics and share our opinions about various philosophies and ideologies related to fixing America. But who is speaking for God? If you think that the preacher alone has that responsibility, then you misunderstand the role and the responsibility that every believer has in proclaiming God. Third, we need to be God's examples. We need to be those who are demonstrating his person, his character, so that as the light of the world and as the salt of the earth, others may see God and glorify him based on our good works. Fourth, we need to be in prayer. We spend a lot of time talking to each other, but how much time do we spend talking to God, praying for kings and all in authority, as we are commanded in Scripture? And fifth and last, we need to encourage the wayward. There are so many who have gone astray, so many who were once a part of the flock, who have not been called, who have not been sought out, who have been discouraged by things in the church as well as things out of the church. Let's be a voice in their ear, appealing to them to find their way back to the Lord, so that when God looks at this country and he determines whether or not he's going to bring judgment or wrath, if Jesus, who is interceding in our behalf, says to him, would you spare it if we can find just 10 righteous people? Don't look to the government and say it's their fault that our country is the way it is. Look at yourself by self-examination. Be God's spokesperson. Be an example. certainly be in prayer and be a person who calls wayward souls back home. You may not do anything to change what's happening in D.C., but you can certainly do something to change how God sees this country because of how God sees you. This has been another installment of A Few Minutes with the Minister with Words from the Master. Hope that you will take heed so that God might spare us.